NEOM was sold as the city of the future, a 170-kilometer mirror wall in the desert. No cars, no roads, 9 million people, robots, flying taxis, artificial intelligence running daily life. Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman called it a new way for humans to live. But behind the glossy trailers, the numbers are now brutal. A reported internal estimate put NEOM's possible full cost at $8.8 trillion by 2080. That is not just over budget. That is bigger than the yearly output of most countries on Earth. And the most famous part of NEOM, the line, has been reported as scaled back from a 170-kilometer city to only a tiny first section by 2030. The dream was sold as a robotic utopia. The reality looks like delays, cuts, worker deaths, rising costs, and a desert project running out of time. This is how Saudi Arabia's biggest future city became one of the biggest warning signs in the world. When NEOM was first announced, it felt like science fiction had been turned into a government plan. Saudi Arabia did not just promise a new city, it promised a new civilization. The line would cut through the desert like a giant mirror. It would be 500 meters tall, 200 meters wide, and 170 kilometers long. There would be no normal streets, no normal cars, and no normal city layout. People would live in layers, stacked inside two giant mirrored walls. Everything they needed would be within a 5-minute walk. A high-speed train would move people from one end to the other. It sounded impossible on purpose. That was the point. Mohammed bin Salman was not only selling buildings, he was selling a new image of Saudi Arabia. Not just oil, not just desert, not just old power. NEOM was supposed to prove that Saudi Arabia could become the center of technology, tourism, clean energy, luxury living, and global investment. For a while, the world watched. Famous consultants joined, big architects were linked to the plan. Promotional videos showed blue water, green spaces, perfect homes, and people living in a future that looked clean and calm. NEOM was not presented like a normal construction project. It was presented like history being made. But the problem with a dream that big is simple. At some point, somebody has to build it. And that is where the story begins to crack. The official idea of the line was already extreme. A city 170 kilometers long is longer than many daily commutes between major cities. Building a normal city is hard enough. Building one as a mirrored wall through a desert with huge towers, high-speed transport, cooling systems, power systems, water systems, homes, offices, schools, hospitals, hotels, and public services is a different kind of challenge. It is not just expensive, it is physically punishing. NEOM is in northwest Saudi Arabia, in a harsh desert region near the Red Sea. The area has heat, wind, sand, long distances, and limited existing urban support. That means almost everything must be brought in, built, powered, staffed, and maintained from the ground up. A normal city grows slowly. People move in, roads expand, shops open, schools follow, utilities grow with demand. NEOM tried to reverse that process. It wanted to build the perfect future first, then fill it with people later. That sounds bold in a trailer. On a construction site, it becomes a nightmare. The first major warning sign was cost. NEOM was widely known as a $500 billion project. That number alone was huge. But later reports said an internal estimate projected a possible end state cost of $8.8 trillion by 2080. That does not mean Saudi Arabia has already spent that amount. It means the full dream could cost that much if built as imagined. That difference matters. But even as a projection, the number is shocking. It tells us something important. The old sales pitch and the real cost of delivery may not live in the same world. The dream was priced like ambition. The construction reality was priced like a warning. Then came the scale back reports. The line was sold as a 170-kilometer city for 9 million people. But reports said the first 2030 target had been reduced sharply, with only a small section expected by then and a far smaller population than the original vision. Saudi officials have pushed back against claims that the project has lost its intended scale. But the market heard the message clearly. The future city was no longer racing forward as first promised. It was being slowed, reviewed, and reshaped. That is not a small detail. It changes the whole story. If the line is only built in a small section, it does not work like the original idea. The promise depended on scale. The train, the services, the population, the business model, the tourism value, and the city design all needed a massive, finished system. A tiny section of the line is not a city of the future. It is a test piece. And test pieces do not prove a revolution. They prove that the real thing is still far away. The second warning sign was money pressure. Saudi Arabia is still rich. It has oil, a huge sovereign wealth fund, and global influence. But even rich countries have limits. Vision 2030 is not only NEOM. Saudi Arabia is also building resorts, stadiums, tourism zones, entertainment districts, airports, transport systems, and sports projects. It is preparing for Expo 2030 and the 2034 World Cup. Every project wants money. Every project wants workers. Every project wants global attention. At the same time, oil revenue can rise and fall. The government cannot spend forever as if every dream has no cost. That is why reports of write-downs and reviews matter. They show that Saudi Arabia is not only dreaming now, it is counting. Counting is dangerous for a project like NEOM, because once leaders start asking what must be finished first, the biggest fantasy parts become harder to defend. A port can make money. A hotel can open. A data center can serve a business need. A huge mirrored city for millions of people in the desert is much harder to explain when budgets tighten. That is why NEOM may not fully disappear. It may change shape. Parts of it can still survive. Sindala, Oxagon, Trojena, ports, luxury resorts, energy work, and technology zones may keep moving in some form. But that is not the same as the original promise. The original promise was a complete future world. The new reality looks more like a group of smaller projects trying to save useful pieces from a giant idea. The third warning sign is human cost. Behind every futuristic render is labor. Concrete does not pour itself. Steel does not rise by magic. Roads, camps, tunnels, bridges, hotels, towers, power lines, and water systems are built by human beings, often migrant workers from poorer countries. Human rights groups have warned for years about labor abuse in Saudi Arabia. Reports have raised concerns about unpaid wages, unsafe sites, recruitment debt, heat risk, poor investigations after deaths, and families struggling to receive answers or compensation. Some documentaries and reports have claimed very high death and missing worker numbers connected to Saudi Vision 2030 projects, including NEOM. Those numbers are disputed and hard to fully verify, so they must be handled carefully. But the wider pattern is not easy to dismiss. Human Rights Watch and other groups have documented serious concerns about migrant worker deaths and workplace safety in Saudi Arabia. This matters because NEOM is not just judged by what it builds. It is judged by what it costs people. A city that claims to put humans first cannot ignore the humans building it. That is the moral crack in the mirror. NEOM's ads show clean air, green spaces, and happy future residents. But critics point to worker camps, dangerous heat, and families who say they never got proper answers after loved ones died. That contrast is powerful because it breaks the illusion. The project wants to look weightless, but its weight is carried by workers. The fourth warning sign is forced displacement. NEOM is being built in a real place, not an empty video game map. People lived in and around the region before the project became famous. Members of the Hoatat tribe have spoken out against removals linked to the development. Human rights groups have raised concerns about forced displacement and harsh punishment for people who resisted. This is another reason the dream is not clean. The promotional version of NEOM talks about nature, peace, and a better future. The contested version talks about land, power, fear, and people removed from homes so the future can be built over them. That kind of story does not go away. It follows the project. Every time NEOM sells itself as a paradise, critics can ask one simple question. Paradise for whom? That question is hard to answer with a luxury trailer. The fifth warning sign is demand. Even if Saudi Arabia could build the line exactly as planned, another question remains. Would 9 million people actually want to live there? A city is not just a building. It is habits, families, jobs, noise, mistakes, street life, culture, and freedom to change. Real cities are messy because humans are messy. The line tried to solve that mess with design. But people are not software. Would families want to live inside a narrow, mirrored structure in the desert? Would companies move their best people there? Would global workers choose it over Dubai, London, Singapore, New York, or Riyadh? Would tourists visit once for curiosity, then return again? These are not small questions. They decide whether NEOM becomes a living city or a very expensive showroom. This is where the collapse story becomes deeper than delays. NEOM is not collapsing only because construction is hard. It is collapsing because the idea may have been too controlled from the start. It imagined a perfect city before proving that people wanted that version of perfection. Dubai grew because it solved real problems for trade, travel, business, tax, and lifestyle. It also sold a dream, but it connected that dream to working airports, working ports, working offices, and working markets. NEOM tried to begin at the dream stage. Now it has to prove the basics. Can people live there? Can companies profit there? Can the water, power, heat control, transport, and services work at scale? Can Saudi Arabia keep paying? Can the project survive without endless hype? That is the real test. And right now, the hype is weaker than it used to be. The polished trailers still exist. The official websites still show the same future language. The renders still look unreal. But the public mood has changed. More people now see NEOM less as a guaranteed future and more as a symbol of overreach. That is dangerous for Saudi Arabia. Because NEOM was not just a building project. It was the crown jewel of Vision 2030. It was supposed to show that the kingdom could move beyond oil and become a magnet for money, talent, and tourism. If NEOM shrinks, the damage is not only financial, it is reputational. Investors watch delays, workers watch safety, tourists watch headlines, governments watch stability, and Saudi citizens watch whether the promises made in their name can actually be delivered. Still, NEOM is not dead. That is important. Some parts may open. Some zones may work. Some tourism areas may attract wealthy visitors. Some industrial pieces may become useful. The project may be cut down, redesigned, and turned into something more practical. But if that happens, it proves the main point. The original NEOM dream was too big to survive contact with reality. A smaller NEOM may be possible. The giant mirror city fantasy is the part under pressure. And that is why this story matters. NEOM is a warning about what happens when leaders confuse vision with physics. Money can buy land. It can hire consultants. It can buy ads. It can bring cranes into the desert. But money cannot easily buy time, trust, demand, safety, or human belief. Those things must be earned. Saudi Arabia wanted NEOM to show the world the future. Instead, NEOM may show the world something older and simpler. A country can be rich and still overreach. A leader can be powerful and still misjudge limits. A project can look perfect on screen and still struggle in the sand. The line was supposed to be 170 kilometers of proof that Saudi Arabia could bend the future into shape. But in 2026, the strongest image is not the mirror wall. It is the gap between the promise and the ground. One side has robots, flying taxis, perfect climate, and 9 million people living in a city like no other. The other side has rising costs, delays, worker concerns, scaled back targets, and a desert that does not care about a promotional video. That is the real collapse. Not one loud explosion, not one official cancellation, but a slow shrinking of the dream. And maybe that is even more damaging. Because the world was promised the city of tomorrow. What it may get instead is the most expensive lesson in modern construction history. The future cannot be built by hype alone.